The chain hit the cobblestones with a sound like a cannon shot, and every head in Karrenmoor's market square turned. John Lockhart had been minding the cooling rack outside his forge when the city guard dragged her through the eastern gate, an orc woman, wrists bound in iron, a length of heavy chain looped from her collar to the sergeant's saddle horn. She walked upright despite it, chin level, dark green eyes scanning the crowd with something that was not fear. It was calculation. It was contempt. Her jaw was set hard, and the lower tusks that framed her mouth were unmarked, unnotched. She had not been broken in any fight, whatever they claimed she had done. She wore a fitted warrior's vest of dark boiled leather over a rust-red linen shirt laced tight at the throat and wrists, the leather tooled with clan marks John did not recognize, and snug dark riding leathers tucked into knee-high boots. Everything about her clothes was functional and close-fitted and spoke of someone who moved fast when she needed to, and who had never intended to be caught standing still in chains. The Sergeant Aldrich Bren, a thick-necked man who'd bought 3 of John's belt knives and never once said thank you, stood in his stirrups and bellowed to the growing crowd. Blood price prisoner, orc raider taken on the Stoneback Road. Lord Marin has ordered her held at the castle gate until the blood price is settled or a buyer comes forward. Any man who shelters her or frees her answers for the debt himself. That is the law of Karrenmoor. The crowd murmured. Not kindly. John set down the knife he had been filing and leaned against his door frame, arms folded, watching. He had lived in Karrenmoor for 11 years, long enough to know that blood price cases almost never got settled fairly when the prisoner was an orc. Usually they sat in the public cage at the castle gate until some lord bought the debt as labor, and the orc in question spent the next several years doing whatever hard and ugly work a lord needed done. It was legal. It had always turned John's stomach. He looked at her face again. She was not what the word raider painted. She was perhaps 26 or 27 by the look of her, not much younger than him, and she held herself like someone accustomed to command, not like someone who'd been running wild on the roads. There was a cut above her left brow, dried dark, and her lower lip had been split recently. Someone had hit her after she was already in chains. That was also, technically, legal in Karrenmoor, as long as the prisoner was alive at the time of settlement. John unfolded his arms and went back inside his forge. He had work to do. He had a commission from a merchant house, 4 short swords, plain hilts, no decoration, delivery in 10 days, and he was behind by 2 days already. He picked up the file again and got back to work, and he told himself firmly that the orc woman chained at the castle gate was not his problem. He lasted until sundown. The market square emptied when the light went. John banked his forge coals and walked out into the cooling evening air and stood at the edge of the square and looked across at the castle gate, where the public cage was a permanent iron fixture bolted to the old stone wall. She was inside it. The chain from her collar ran through the cage bars to a ring bolt in the wall so that she could not even stand fully upright. A single torch guttered in its bracket 3 feet above her head, enough for anyone passing to see her, not enough to keep her warm as the late-season chill came down off the hills. She was looking directly at him. John walked across the empty square. He told himself he was getting a better look, that was all. He was a craftsman. He was curious about things. Up close she was striking in a way that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. The torchlight caught the planes of her face, broad cheekbones, a strong jaw, those dark green eyes that were currently staring at him with the precise and patient intensity of someone deciding whether he was useful or not. There was dried blood on the collar where it had cut into her neck. Her hands were still in irons even inside the cage, which seemed like excessive cruelty to him. "You are staring," she said. Her voice was low and clear. The common tongue came out of her with the faint roughness of someone who had learned it as a second language and had long since mastered it. "I'm sorry," John said. I was staring. Are you hurt badly? That collar is cutting you." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why do you care about that?" "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "What is your name?" A beat of silence. He had the impression she was deciding whether he deserved it. "Lash," she said. "Lash Steeljaw. John Lockhart. I have a forge across the square. I make blades." He glanced at the ring bolt on the wall behind her. "Is there anything I can do? Water. I can get you water." "I do not need your pity," she said. Not hard exactly. Flat. Like something she had said before to other people and gotten burned for. "It is not pity," he said. "It is just water. The offer stands." He brought her water, and she drank it without looking away from him, and neither of them said anything while she drank. When she handed the cup back through the bars, her fingers brushed his, and she did not flinch from the contact the way most orcs did with humans in a city like this, where the whole history of two peoples bristled between them like a drawn blade. "They said raider," John said. "I know what they said." "Is it true?" She looked at him with those dark green eyes for a long moment. "No," she said. "Not in the way they mean it." John nodded. He did not push it. He said good night and went home to his forge and lay on his cot above the workroom and stared at the ceiling and thought about a woman chained at a wall with dried blood on her collar, and about the look on her face when he had asked her name, and about the particular way she had said, "Not in the way they mean it," which was the answer of someone with a story too large to tell through iron bars in the dark. He was back at dawn with bread and a proper breakfast wrapped in cloth, and she accepted it with a composed dignity that he found himself profoundly respecting. She ate neatly and thanked him in a voice that suggested she was not accustomed to thanking people and was doing it anyway because she had decided he had earned it. "The blood price," he said. "Who does the debt belong to? What lord holds it?" "Lord Davin Marin." "The son, not the father. Merrick Marin." She said the second name the way you'd say the name of something you'd stepped on in the dark. "He claims my warband crossed his toll road and did not pay." "The toll road that his father built across land our clan has used for 3 generations. John thought about this. "How large is the price?" 40 silver marks. He didn't let his face change much. 40 silver was roughly 3 months of strong commissions for him, more than that if the merchant house order fell through for any reason. It was a real sum, but not a ruinous one, not for someone who'd been careful with money for a decade, and who kept a locked box under the floor of his forge for emergencies. "Where is your warband now?" he asked. A flicker of something not pain exactly, something harder and quieter than pain. "Merrick Marin has my second and my scout in his dungeon. He let the others go. He kept the 3 of us for the price." "He let your people go but kept 3, John said slowly. "The 3 he had particular reasons for wanting." She did not explain what reasons. John let it rest. Over the next 3 days he came at dawn and at dusk with food and water, and he brought a spare blanket that the guard on duty, a young man named Pell who seemed uncomfortable with the whole business, let him pass through the bars, and slowly, incrementally, Lash Steeljaw began to talk to him. She was a war band captain. Her band 28 fighters, not raiders, but a hired protection company that escorted merchant caravans through the hill country north of Karrenmoor, had been working the Stoneback Road for 2 years. Merrick Marin, the young lord who had recently inherited the East Tollgate from his ailing father, had decided that an orc war band operating freely on a road he considered his revenue was an insult to his dignity. He had set a trap, a false distress call from a farm on the road, his soldiers waiting in the tree line. John filed this away and thought about it and went back to his forge and made blades and thought about it some more. On the 4th day he came to her at midday, not at the usual times, and stood at the cage bars and said, "I want to pay your blood price." Lash went absolutely still. "Why?" she said. It was not a question the way it would have been from someone frightened and desperate. It was the question of a woman who had learned to be precise about motives. "Because I don't think you're guilty of anything," he said, "and because I can." "If you pay it," she said carefully, "the law says I owe service to you. That is how blood price settlement works in this city." "I know. You want a warband captain for a servant." "I want no such thing," he said. "I would pay it and then tell you that you owe me nothing and let you do whatever you need to do." She looked at him for a long time. those green eyes moving over his face with the systematic attention of someone reading a map. He was not a remarkable-looking man, he knew that. He was 31, broad through the shoulders from years at the anvil, calloused hands, a plain face that people generally found trustworthy without finding it particularly interesting. He had brown eyes and dark hair going a bit gray at the temples and a scar on his chin from a piece of hot metal that had jumped a bench when he was 19. Nothing about him announced himself. "What do you want in return?" she said. "Not a concession." A demand for honesty. John thought about it honestly. "I want to know your story," he said, "not as payment, just because I find I want to know it." Something shifted in her face. Something small and guarded and then less guarded. "Pay it," she said. He went to the city clerk's office that afternoon and laid down 40 silver marks and signed the settlement paper and walked back across the square to where Sergeant Bren was standing at the cage with an expression that suggested he did not entirely approve of this development. "She's settled," John said, holding out the paper. Bren looked at it, looked at John. "You're a fool, Lockhart." "Probably," John agreed pleasantly. "She's settled, Sergeant." Bren took the key from his belt and unlocked the cage, and then unlocked the collar, and then unlocked the wrist irons, working through each one with the deliberate slowness of a man who wanted to make a point, and each lock that fell open felt to John like a small detonation of rightness. Lash Steeljaw stepped out of the cage and straightened to her full height, which was roughly the same as his 5'10", maybe an inch more, and rolled her shoulders back and looked around the square with those green eyes, cataloging everything, and then she looked at him. "Thank you, John Lockhart," she said, quietly, like it cost her something to say. A crowd had gathered. It usually did in a market square, whenever something interesting happened at the castle gate. About 30 people stood watching from varying distances, and not all of the expressions were benign. John was aware of muttering. He was aware of the way several of the market men were looking at him. The shoemaker, the grain merchant, 2 of the tallow chandlers, with the tight-mouthed disapproval of people who had a strong opinion about what orcs did and didn't deserve. He was also aware that Lash was standing next to him free and unmarked, except for the collar cut on her neck, and that she had a directness about her that made it impossible to look at anything else in the square. "Come," he said, "I'll take you to my forge. There's a back room where you can sleep and eat properly while we figure out what to do about your people in Marin's dungeon." She turned to look at him sharply. "I did not ask you to help with that." "No," he said, "I'm offering." Another of those long, precise looks. "All right," she said. The walk across the square was short, and John kept his pace unhurried, not performing anything for the watching crowd, just walking, and Lash walked beside him with the easy, contained stride of someone who spent their life moving over rough ground. He could feel the watchers behind them. He could feel the weight of their opinions pressing against his back like something physical, and he did not turn around. His forge was a solid stone building on the west side of the square, 2 floors, the lower given over entirely to the work, the upper barely a room with a cot and a table and a small hearth, which was where he lived. There was a back room off the workshop, originally a storage space, with a window that looked onto the alley and a rope cot that he kept there for the nights when he worked too late to go up the stairs. He showed her the back room and left her a blanket and a candle and a bowl of water and a piece of soap, which were humble offerings, and he knew it. "I know it's not much," he said. "I have slept in the open with one eye on the tree line for 15 years, she said dryly. "This is extraordinary by comparison." He laughed, and she looked briefly surprised that he had laughed, and then the corner of her mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile but was close enough. He left her to clean up and wash the blood from her neck and went back to his forge and stood at the anvil for a long time without touching anything, thinking. The merchant commission. His locked box under the floor. Merrick Marin and what kind of man he was. The fact that 2 members of Lash's war band were still in a castle dungeon 3 miles up the road. He was not sure when he had decided that he was going to do something about all of that. Somewhere between the first visit to the cage and the 40 silver marks. somewhere in the space of 4 days, and a woman who drank his water without looking away from his eyes. He started sharpening. She came out of the back room an hour later, the blood cleaned off, and stood in the doorway of the workshop watching him work. He was aware of her watching but didn't break his rhythm. There was something deeply comfortable about being observed doing the work he had been doing for 13 years, something that required no performance or explanation. "You are good," she said after a while. "At what?" "The work." She nodded at the blade in his hands. "You have an economy of motion, no wasted movement. You have been doing this a long time." "Since I was 18, he said. "I learned from my master in Veldra and then came north when he died. Karrenmoor needed a bladesmith." He glanced up. "Are you hungry, properly hungry?" "Yes." He fed her a real meal, salt pork and lentils, and good bread from the baker 2 doors down, which he fetched himself while she sat at the small table in the back room, and ate with the deliberate focus of someone who had learned not to take food for granted. He sat across from her and ate too, and they talked, and this was where she began to tell him the story he had asked for. Her clan was the Steeljaw, a hill clan 2 days' ride north of Karrenmoor. Her father had been the war band captain before her, and she had taken the rank when he died fighting a bandit company 7 years ago. She had 28 fighters under her 26 now, because 2 were in Marin's dungeon, and they were professionals, disciplined, with a reputation among the merchant houses of the region that was built on 8 years of reliable work. She had contracts. She had a ledger. She had correspondence from 3 separate merchant guilds attesting to the quality and honesty of her work, none of which mattered to Marin, who had apparently decided that the Stoneback Road needed to be under complete human control, and that the most efficient way to accomplish this was to neutralize the only force that had been keeping it reliably safe for years. "He baited the trap, took 3 of us, and let the others go so they would carry the message back to any other warband thinking about working that road," Lash said. "He is not stupid. He is effective." He knew that putting 25 armed orcs outside his walls would be difficult, so he sent them away before anyone could organize. "And the 2 he kept with you," John said carefully. "What are their names?" "Kred and Sova." She said the names with the flat weight of responsibility. "Kred has been with me since the beginning. He is my second. Sova is the youngest. She was on her first real contract." John watched her face and saw the thing she was carrying, saw the disciplined suppression of it. He said nothing about it. "Marin won't be easy to move on a dungeon matter," he said instead, practically. "He'll claim lawful prisoner holding, and technically under the blood price law he has a case as long as the price isn't paid. Which is why I need to know what price he set for them," Lash said. "Before I left the dungeon I heard one of his guards say 20 each, 40 silver total." John looked at his hands for a moment. He was not a wealthy man. He had a trade that paid well in good years and adequately in lean ones, and he had 40 silver in his locked box which had just become 0 silver. He thought about the merchant commission. "I need to finish 4 sword blanks by end of week," he said. "That's 12 silver. And I have an advance on a nobleman's knife, a presentation piece, been working on it for 2 months that I haven't been paid yet. That's another 25 when it's done." Lash was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. He went on. "I can finish the presentation knife in 4 days if I work nights, and I have raw material and a standing offer from the garrison armorer for anything I can deliver quickly. Service blades, nothing fancy, plain edge, good steel." He was calculating as he talked. 30 days of hard work, maybe 35, and I can cover the other 40. "John Lockhart," she said. He looked up. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that was less steady, something she was holding back. "You do not know Kred and Sova. You do not know me. You paid 40 silver you did not have to spare on a prisoner you had no obligation to. Now you are talking about working your hands to bone for 30 days more for people you have never met. Why?" He thought about it honestly, the way she had asked him to be honest on the first day. "Because it's the right thing," he said. And because he stopped. Because what? Because you're the first person I have sat across a table from in a long time, he said, who asks me things like why and means it. Lash looked at him for a long time across the table in the candlelight of his back room, and the calculation in her green eyes shifted into something else, something warmer and more tentative, and she said nothing for a while. Then she said, I can help. I can work. Tell me what a warband captain can do in a forge. He almost said you don't have to, and then looked at her face and understood that she was not offering out of debt or duty. She was offering because she needed to do something, because sitting still with two of her people in a dungeon was not something her nature could sustain. Can you work a bellows? He asked. I can do anything you need me to do, she said. So they worked. Those first 2 weeks had a quality John would remember for a long time afterward, a quality of days compressed and vivid and purposeful in a way his solitary work had not been for years. He forged and she bellowed and carried and organized, and she learned faster than anyone he had taught, and he had taken on 3 apprentices over the years, none of whom had her focus. She did not make conversation while they worked, but she was present in a way that made the silence full instead of empty, and when she did speak, it was precise and often surprising. She knew the tensile properties of different steel grades because she had spent a lifetime selecting and maintaining edged weapons. She knew blade geometry and the signs of a poor temper in finished steel. She would pick up a completed blade and test its flex and balance, and tell him within seconds whether something was right or slightly off, and she was never wrong. Outside, the forge was less comfortable. Karrenmoor was a walled city of about 4,000 people with a particular culture around blood price law and orc relations that ran to the suspicious and occasionally the hostile. John had lived here long enough that his neighbors tolerated him as a good craftsman and a quiet man who paid his bills and didn't cause trouble, and they transferred their tolerance to Lash in an extremely limited and conditional way that amounted to not actively saying anything while she was in earshot. But he heard things when he went to market alone. Fool Lockhart and his orc woman. Does he know what she is? Let her get to the castle gate again, and she will not come out. The grain merchant, a heavy-set man named Tull who had a seat on the town council, came to the forge on the 9th day and stood in the doorway with his arms folded and told John that there were people in the city who were not comfortable with the arrangement, and that John should consider his standing with his neighbors and his clients before making it worse. John looked at him and said, Is there anything you need from my forge, Tull? Because if there isn't, I have work to do. Tull left. Lash appeared from the back room where she had been mending a strap on her vest. She had heard the whole thing through the wall. The forge was not large. You did not have to do that, she said. I know. It will cost you. Tull buys 2 kitchen knives a year from me, John said. I'll survive. She looked at him with those green eyes, and there was something in her face that he was beginning to recognize, a kind of guarded wonder, like a person who has been told all their life that certain things are not for them, encountering one of those things at close range, and not yet trusting that it is real. He turned back to the anvil so she wouldn't see the smile he couldn't entirely contain. By the 14th day, the presentation knife was done. It was the best piece he had made in 2 years. A 14-inch single-edged blade with a grip he had wrapped in darkened cord over a core of carved bone, with a small inlaid steel medallion at the bolster that he had spent 3 evenings getting right. He delivered it to the Lord's steward and came back with 25 silver marks in his pocket and the beginnings of a plan. That evening he sat across from Lash at the table and laid out what he had in hand. 25 from the knife, 12 from the sword blanks delivered, 8 more from service blades sold to the garrison. 45 silver, 5 more than the 40 he needed. He pushed it across the table to her. She looked at it and then at him. To pay the blood price for cred and sova, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I will repay you every mark. You don't have to. I know I don't, she said. That is why I am saying it as a choice. I will repay you every mark. Her eyes were steady on his. "John, you have given me things that cannot be repaid, the money I can pay back, the rest." She stopped. He waited. "You made me feel like a person," she said, "in a cage, in this city. You looked at me and you saw a person. I have not forgotten that, and I will not." The workshop was quiet except for the distant sound of the square outside and the soft voice of the coals settling in the banked forge. The candle between them made the light close and warm, and Lash's face in that light was, he let himself think it, finally, sitting across from her with 45 silver marks on the table between them, beautiful. Not in the way that required gentleness to describe. Beautiful the way a well-made blade is beautiful, purposefully, with an edge to it, with a history worked into every line. He was aware that his heart was doing something inadvisable. "We should go to Marin tomorrow," he said, because saying anything else required a courage he was not yet certain he had. "Yes," she said. She was still looking at him in a way that made the back of his neck warm. "We should." Going to Lord Merrick Marin's castle was an experience that John filed under things I did not enjoy but would do again. Marin himself was 25, thin, with the particular air of someone who had inherited power before earning any of it, and had spent the years since finding ways to make it felt. He received them in the great hall, surrounded by 4 guards, and looked at Lash with an expression that was part triumph and part something uglier. "The orc captain," he said. "You found someone to pay your price, how convenient." "And the price for my 2 people in your dungeon," Lash said. Her voice was flat and professional. 40 silver, as your guard stated." "My guard misstated," Marin said. "I've had time to reconsider. The price for both is 80. John felt Lash go very still beside him. He felt it as a physical thing, the particular stillness of someone choosing not to do what they very much wanted to do. "The stated price at the time of taking was 40, John said, keeping his voice even. "That is the price that the law locks in. You cannot raise it after the fact." Marin's eyes moved to him with cool displeasure. "And who are you?" "John Lockhart, bladesmith of Karrenmoor. I have the settlement law here." He reached into his coat and produced the folded copy he had borrowed from the city clerk's office and read for 2 evenings. Section 7, Article 3 of the Karrenmoor blood price statute. The price set at time of taking is binding and may not be altered by the holder. Attempt to do so voids the holder's legal claim and subjects him to a counterclaim by the prisoner. Marin stared at the paper. His jaw tightened. "I could arrange for this to be disputed," he said softly. "You could," John agreed. "And then it would go before a magistrate, and the magistrate would be obligated to look at the whole case, including the circumstances of taking, including whether the toll road claim has legal standing under the older land use treaties, which I understand it may not." He kept his voice pleasant. He was not brave in the theatrical sense. He was just stubborn, and he had done his reading, and there was a woman standing next to him who had been chained by the collar for a wrong she had not committed, and he found that he was willing to say a great deal of uncomfortable things to a petty lord on her behalf. Marin looked between them for a long moment. 40 silver, he said finally. "You will get your people, and then you will not set foot on my road again, Captain." "Your road," Lash said, "is not as safe without my war band on it. You will find that out, not a threat, a statement of fact." She said it with total calm. Marin's face went tight. He took the money and they got the prisoners. Cred was a large orc in his mid-30s with a broken nose and a calm disposition, and he looked at John when Lash introduced them with an expression that was professionally neutral and privately interested. Sova was 22 and had a bruised face and a split knuckle that suggested she had not spent the time in the dungeon entirely passively, and she looked at John with open curiosity that he found endearing. The 4 of them walked out of Marin's castle gate into the cold afternoon air, and Cred said, very quietly to Lash in Orcish, something that made her answer in a short, precise burst that sounded, from the cadence of it, like "not yet, we will discuss it later." John decided he did not need to know what that exchange contained. They made camp that night at the edge of the road, a short distance from the city wall, and Lash's remaining warband came in the following morning. She had sent a message north when she was first freed, and the reunion was loud and physical and deeply emotional in the contained way of soldiers who have been trained not to show too much. John sat a little apart and watched and felt the particular loneliness of an outsider at someone else's homecoming, which was familiar to him in the abstract but had never had a specific face to pin to it before. Lash came and sat next to him while her people set up camp around them. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said, surprised she had noticed. "Just watching. You look like a man who is waiting to be sent away," she said. He looked at her, the directness of it. "I'm not," he said, "but I know this is your people, not mine. I don't want to be in the way." "You are not in the way," she said. She held his gaze for a moment. "You freed my people, John. You are not in the way." He nodded. A log on the campfire shifted and sent a spray of sparks into the dark above them. Lash was close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching, and the warmth from the fire and the warmth of her proximity were pleasantly indistinguishable. "What happens now?" he asked. "For your war band, I mean. Marin won't let you back on the Stoneback Road." "There are other roads," she said. "The Grayville Passage to the south has been asking for protection for 2 seasons. We will go there." She paused. "But I have unfinished business in Karrenmoor first." Something in the way she said it made him look at her. Her jaw was set in the particular way he had come to recognize as the expression she wore when she was deciding something. "What kind of unfinished business?" he asked. "The kind I will tell you about when it is done," she said. He did not push it. He told himself it was because she had earned her privacy. He told himself it was not because any time she said she would tell him something later, he found himself automatically wanting to be present for later. He went back to Karrenmoor the next day. Back to the forge, back to the merchant commission, back to the rhythm of hammer and bellows and the smell of hot metal. The back room was empty without her. The forge was quieter than it had been in 2 weeks, and the quiet felt different now, not peaceful but simply absent. He noticed this and did not dwell on it, or tried not to. She came back 4 days later. She came at dusk, rapping her knuckles on the back door with the particular two-knock-and-a-pause rhythm that she had established without comment during the weeks she'd been here, and he opened it and she stepped inside and said without preamble, "I told Cred to take the warband south. I am staying in Karrenmoor a while longer." John's heart did something he chose not to analyze. "You can have the back room," he said. "Good," she said. "I need it." She looked at him with those green eyes, and there was something new in the look, something that had moved through the careful professional wall she kept up, something warm and deliberate. "I also want it. Staying. I want to stay." The distinction mattered. He understood that she was making it matter. "Then stay," he said. She stayed. She did not explain the unfinished business and he did not ask, but he noticed things over the following 2 weeks that assembled themselves into a picture he could not entirely ignore. She left the forge in the early mornings, before he was properly awake, and came back at midday smelling of cold air and wood smoke and something else, something outdoorsy and sharp, that he gradually identified as the particular smell of someone who had been moving fast through a wooded area. She came back with mud on her boots that was not Market Square mud. She carried her long knife always, which she had before, but now she wore the shorter blade at the small of her back that she had not bothered with previously. She was tracking something. He was reasonably certain of this. He also noticed that she watched him. Not the way someone watches a person they don't trust, but the way someone watches a person they are trying to understand, and he began to watch her back. And what developed between them in those 2 weeks was a kind of mutual, increasingly charged attention that had given up pretending to be anything other than what it was. She sat at the table in the evenings while he finished the last of the commission blades, filing and polishing, and she read from the small collection of dog-eared books he kept on the shelf above his cot, books on metallurgy and forge chemistry, and one very worn copy of an adventure narrative about a sea captain that he had owned since he was 20, which she read in 3 days and then held up and said, "This man is an idiot." He had 3 chances to avoid the entire problem, and he chose romance over every one of them. That is sort of the point of the story, John said. The point of the story is that sentimentality makes you bad at navigation, she said, but the corner of her mouth was doing that thing again. Did you like it? He asked. Yes, she said simply. I liked it very much. He finished the commission 3 days ahead of deadline and delivered it and came home with money in his pocket and stopped on the way at the market and bought a good bottle of northern wine, an extravagance he almost never allowed himself, and brought it to the table that evening. Lash looked at it and then at him. What is this for? She asked. The commission is done, he said. I thought we should mark it. We, she said. The word was precise in her mouth. You worked half those blades, he said. You earned the celebration. She looked at the bottle for another moment and then she reached across the table and opened it herself and poured 2 cups and pushed one across to him, and they drank, and somewhere in the middle of the second cup she said, I want to tell you something. All right, he said. I have been tracking a man, she said. In Karrenmoor, that is the unfinished business. He kept his face still. He had suspected. He waited. His name is Garrett Voss, she said. He is a factor for one of the minor merchant houses here. He was in Marin's employ for 2 years before he went independent. She paused. 4 months ago, before the trap on the Stoneback Road, Garrett Voss sold false information to my warband about a merchant convoy that needed protection. The convoy was a fiction. The road it was supposedly using ran through a very isolated stretch of hill country. When we went to meet the convoy, we found 15 armed men waiting instead. John watched her face. We got out, she said. 4 of my people were hurt. 1 nearly died. She set down her cup. Voss gave the information and took the payment, and he was the one who sent us into that ambush. He was working for Marin even then, softening us up before the main trap. I have been gathering evidence of it for 4 months, and 3 days ago I found the last piece I needed, a letter in his own hand, connecting him to Marin's men that I can take to the magistrate. You've been building a legal case, John said slowly. Yes, she met his eyes. I know what you were thinking. You thought I was tracking him to kill him. He said nothing. I considered it, she said honestly. When Dava nearly died on that road, I wanted to find Voss and take his head. But I am not a bandit, and my warband is not a revenge company. If I kill a human factor in a human city, I destroy everything I have built, and I give every man like Marin exactly the story he wants about what orcs do. So I gathered the evidence instead. She looked at him with a directness that felt almost intimate. And tomorrow I am going to the magistrate with it. John said, after a moment, I'd like to come with you. She looked at him. Not to speak for you, he said quickly. You have the evidence and the case. But a human face standing beside you when you present it to a magistrate in this city makes it harder to dismiss, she finished. Yes. She looked at him across the table and the candle between them and the second cup of northern wine and said, You keep doing this. Doing what? Standing beside me, she said, when you have no obligation to. I have no obligation to do anything, he said. That is exactly why I keep doing it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and picked up his hand, the way you pick up something you want to examine closely. And she turned it over and looked at the calluses and the small white scars and the ink stain on his 3rd finger from the paperwork he had done at the clerk's office. And she said, I knew what you were when you brought me water through the bars. His heart was going at an entirely unprofessional rate. What was I? He asked. A man who could not help being decent, she said, and I thought she stopped. Her thumb moved across his palm, a deliberate thing, not a carelessly accidental thing. I thought I could not afford to care about that. Not in a cage, not in a city like this, not with my people in a dungeon. She looked up from his hand to his face. I thought I could not afford to care about you. And now, he asked. His voice came out quieter than intended. Now I think I have been caring about you for 4 weeks, she said, and trying to decide whether you were real. He turned his hand in hers and held it, because that was the right response to that sentence, and she did not pull away but instead looked at their joined hands with an expression that was part wonder and part the look of someone who has been braced for something to go wrong for a very long time. He said, I'm real. She looked up at him. I know, she said. He leaned across the table and kissed her, and she met him without hesitation, and the kiss was warm and certain, and had the quality of a door opening, not the tentative crack of a door pushed experimentally, but the full, confident swing of a door you have been meaning to open for some time. Her free hand came up to the side of his face, and she held him there, and he was glad to be held, deeply and completely glad, in a way that went all the way down through the solitary 11 years and the too quiet forge and the empty table, and landed in something true and steady. When they parted, she kept her hand at his jaw for a moment, studying him. Good, she said, with the satisfied precision of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. He laughed. She smiled, a real one this time, not the corner-of-the-mouth version, a full and slightly devastating smile that showed one tusk. And he thought that this, exactly this, was the thing he had not known he had been missing. The magistrate was a dry, careful man named Helver who had been processing claims in Karrenmoor for 20 years, and who had the air of someone who preferred his cases to arrive tidily documented. Lash arrived with a leather satchel containing 9 separate pieces of evidence, including the letter in Voss's hand, 3 signed witness statements from her warband members, a copy of the contract that had given false convoy information, and a detailed account of the ambush written in her own meticulous hand. Helver read through all of it, with John sitting quietly in the corner and Lash standing at the table, with the composure of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times. When Helver finished reading, he folded his hands on the table and said, "This is thorough." "Yes," Lash said, "the letter is the strongest piece. Yes, Voss will claim forgery. I have a witness who was present when he wrote it," she said, "a human factor from the Eastern Guild who owes Voss no loyalty and who I have already spoken to." Helver looked at her over the top of the document. Then he looked at John. "You are here as a character witness?" he asked. "I am here," John said carefully, "as a free person of Karrenmoor who settled this woman's blood price, and is prepared to swear before you that in the 6 weeks I have known her she has conducted herself with complete integrity. But primarily I am here because I drove a cart of evidence across the square and she needed someone to hold the door." Helver's mouth moved in a way that was probably a smile under a great deal of professional restraint. "The case has merit," he said. "I will issue a summons for Voss and a freeze on his accounts pending investigation." He looked at Lash. "This will take time, and Voss has friends in this city." "I know," Lash said. "So do I," said John, which surprised him slightly, because he had not planned to say it. But Helver looked at him and he thought of the 3 merchants who still bought blades from him and who had specifically told him that their friendship was not contingent on his choices and who would, he was fairly certain, say a word or two in the right ear if he asked. Helver nodded. "I will begin the process," he said. They walked out of the magistrate's hall into the noon light and stood in the street outside, and Lash took a long, slow breath and let it out, and John watched the particular release in her shoulders that was the product of 4 months of carrying something. "It is in motion," she said. "Yes." She turned to look at him. The autumn sun was behind her, and it lit the edges of her dark hair and caught the planes of her face and made her look, John thought, like someone carved specifically for the purpose of making him feel things. "You said so do I," she said. "I know. Do you have friends in this city who will speak for you?" "A few," he said. "I have been here 11 years and I mostly kept my head down and made good blades and tried to be fair. It turns out that has some currency." She looked at him for a long moment in the noon light, and then she took his hand in hers, right there in the street outside the magistrate's hall, in full view of anyone who happened to be passing, and held it with the deliberate firmness of someone making a declaration. "Come on," she said. "I want to show you something." She took him to a market stall on the north side of the square that he had never paid particular attention to, a Steeljaw clan trading post. She explained, one of 3 they maintained in human settlements for selling metalwork and woven goods. The woman running it was a middle-aged orc named Har, who looked at Lash and then at John and their joined hands, and said something in Orcish that made Lash respond with a sharp word, and a look that was not embarrassed but was close to it. John bought a pair of worked bronze bracers from the stall, not because he needed them, but because the work was excellent and he wanted Har to know he had noticed. Har looked at him with recalibrating eyes and gave him a better price than she'd originally named. Lash walked him home through the market, which was at its mid-afternoon busy point, and John was aware of being looked at, of people noticing her hand in his, of the familiar tight-mouthed expressions on some faces and the carefully averted eyes on others. He did not care. He had reached, somewhere in the last 6 weeks, a kind of bedrock certainty about what he was doing and why that made other people's opinions feel like noise from a neighboring room. Present, acknowledged, completely irrelevant. The grain merchant Tull actually stopped in front of them on the market square path, specifically to look. John looked back at him. Lash looked at him with absolutely no expression at all, which was its own statement. Tull moved on. "That was very restrained of you," John said, when the man was out of earshot. "I am working on patience," Lash said gravely, and he burst out laughing, and she did too, right there in the middle of the market square, and several people stared, and neither of them cared in the slightest. The weeks that followed were the best of John's adult life, and he was aware enough to know it as it was happening rather than only in retrospect. Lash was a presence in the forge and in his rooms, and in his days that was unlike anything he had experienced, not intrusive, not demanding, but occupying the space with a completeness that made him understand for the first time how thoroughly he had been living in half his own house. She cooked when he was working late, practical camp food that was better than anything he had managed for himself in years. She repaired things around the forge that he had been meaning to fix for months. She maintained her own weapons with a precision that matched his, and sometimes in the evenings they sat side by side at the workbench, she working her blades and he working steel, in a silence that was the most companionable thing he had ever known. She also tracked the Voss case with methodical attention, checking in regularly with Helver's office and adding evidence as it emerged. And she rode to Marin's castle once on her own, telling John where she was going but not asking permission, which was exactly as it should be, and came back with something satisfied and cool in her expression that she described as "I made Marin understand that his toll road interests and the Voss investigation were connected in ways he might prefer to keep quiet," which John translated as she had made it very clear to a petty lord that cooperating with the magistrate was in his own best interest, and had done it in the precise language of someone who understands leverage. He admired her enormously for this. Voss was summoned before the magistrate 6 weeks after Lash first filed. John went with her. The hearing was in the great hall of the city's judicial building, which was a stone room with high, narrow windows and benches filled with people who had managed to hear about it, because the case had traveled the market rumor circuit with impressive efficiency. There were perhaps 60 people in the room. There were more orcs in that room than John had seen assembled in one place in Karrenmoor in 11 years. A delegation from the Steeljaw clan, including Cred, who had come south when the summons was issued, and Sova, who sat next to Lash and held herself with the tight composure of someone who had a list of grievances and was choosing the legal route. Voss was a wiry man in his 40s, with the face of someone accustomed to talking his way out of things. He had a lawyer. He had 3 character witnesses from his guild. He had, John noted, a very nice coat and the bearing of someone who had never expected this moment to arrive. Lash presented the case herself, in the clear, measured voice she used when she had decided something mattered, and was not going to let it be anything less than precise. She laid out every document, named every witness, explained every connection between Voss and Marin, and did it with a fluency and legal knowledge that clearly surprised Helver, who was nodding incrementally as she spoke. Voss's lawyer objected 3 times. Helver overruled him twice and sustained him once, and the sustained point was a minor procedural one that did not damage the substance of the case. The human witness Lash had found, the Eastern Guild factor, testified briefly and clearly that yes, he had seen Voss write the letter in question. And yes, he was aware that Voss had been receiving payments from Marin's accounts for 2 years. The room was not entirely quiet during all of this. There was muttering, the kind of low undercurrent that fills a public hearing in a city like Karrenmoor when the person making the case is an orc, and the person being accused is a human merchant with guild connections. John sat in the front row and watched Lash stand at the table and refused to be rattled by any of it, and felt a fierce and proprietary pride that he had no technical right to and felt anyway. When it was over, when Helver announced that the evidence was sufficient for full investigation, that Voss's accounts were frozen pending inquiry, that the original ambush would be treated as criminal fraud and potential incitement to violence, and that Marin would be contacted regarding his role in the matter, the room went through a complicated emotional sequence that ended somewhere between frustrated silence on one side of the aisle and contained relief on the other. Voss looked at Lash across the room as he was being escorted out by Helver's officers. His expression was not friendly. "Careful," Cred said quietly, materializing at John's left shoulder. "I know," John said. He looked at Lash. She was still standing at the table, gathering her documents, with the composed and unsurprised expression of someone who has won a thing they worked 4 months to win and is now already thinking about what comes next. Sova was saying something to her in Orcish, something urgent and pleased, and Lash said something back that made Sova laugh and hug her briefly, which Lash received with a mixture of tolerance and genuine warmth that John found very affecting. She looked up and found him across the room, and their eyes met, and what passed between them in that look was not a question anymore. The celebration that night was held at the forge, a real one, the warband camping in the square outside and the cooking fire burning high, and someone in Cred's pack had a skin of strong orcish grain spirit that circulated several times more than was strictly advisable, and there was singing of a kind John had never heard before. Orcish clan songs that sounded nothing like human music and were completely beautiful in their foreignness, big, deep rhythmic things that seemed to come from the chest outward. John sat with Lash's shoulder against his, her hand in his, and watched her people be happy around a fire in his square, and felt the particular completeness of a man who has unexpectedly found himself in the right place. Cred came and sat next to him at some point in the middle of the evening, not saying anything at first, just sitting with the comfortable size of a man who was used to taking up space. Then he said, "She told me what you did, the price." "Yes," John said, "all of it." "The second price, the evidence work, the magistrate." "It was her work," John said. "The evidence was all her." Cred looked at him. "You know what she is," he said, "captain of the Steeljaw war band. Daughter of Lash Steeljaw. She has fought in 12 engagements, led this band for 7 years, turned down 3 very profitable contracts because they required her to work with people she knew to be dishonest." He was watching John's face. "She has never brought a person home before, to the forge or anywhere else." John said nothing for a moment. Then, "I know she's extraordinary." Cred nodded slowly. "She is also," he said, "not a simple thing to love. She keeps too much behind her teeth and works too hard and thinks loyalty means solving problems alone. She has been doing this since her father died." He glanced at Lash across the fire. "What she does not need is someone who will let her do all of it alone and call it respecting her independence." "No," John agreed. "What she needs is someone who will stand next to her and hand her the things she needs before she has to ask." Cred looked at him with a long, evaluating look that John bore with some attempt at equanimity. "Yes," Cred said finally. He stood up. "Good, that is all." He went back to the fire. Lash had been watching this exchange from across the fire. She raised an eyebrow at him. He shook his head slightly and smiled, and she looked at him with that particular expression, warm and precise, and still carrying that trace of wondering if it was real, and shook her own head. But she was smiling when she did it. Later, much later, when the warband had mostly found sleeping spots in the square and the fire had burned down and the city had gone quiet, They stood together in the back room of the forge, and Lash took his face in both her hands, the way she had once held his hand to examine it, and looked at him with those dark green eyes at close range. "I want you to know something," she said. "Tell me." "I am a difficult person," she said. "I do not soften things, and I do not like asking for help, and I have been alone with this warband for a long time, and I am used to it. I am not going to be easy." "I know," he said. "You know nothing yet," she said. "You know 6 weeks." "I know 6 weeks," he agreed. "I would like to know considerably more." She looked at him, and the guarded wonder he had come to love in her face was there again, that expression of a person testing whether the ground will hold them. "So would I," she said. She pulled him close and kissed him, and this one was different from the first. Not the opening of a door, but the settling into a room, warm and certain and entirely sure of itself. He wound his arms around her, and she pressed close with the uncomplicated directness that was entirely her. And the back room of the forge had never felt like much of anywhere, and now it felt like everything. He ran his hand along her jaw, along the strong line of her neck where the collar had left its mark, now healed, and she turned into the touch with a small sound that undid him completely. She was the most capable person he had ever met, and she wanted him and showed it without reservation, and he was, he thought, profoundly and unreservedly glad to be wanted. "Stay," he said against her hair. "I told you I was staying," she said. "I mean tonight, this room." He pulled back enough to look at her. "Unless you," she kissed him again instead of answering, and that was an answer, and the candle burned down, and the city was quiet outside, and neither of them was lonely. The weeks after were charged and warm and full in a way that John had no previous experience of. Lash moved fully into his rooms above the forge. Not a discussion, exactly, more an accumulation of her things appearing in the space, until it was simply true. And the particular quality of living alongside someone changed everything about the forge and the work and the days. Not that he worked less or she took over anything, but that all of it had a different texture now, witnessed and shared, and the things that had been only his were now also theirs, and this felt not like a loss but like a doubling. She had strong opinions about the organization of his tool rack, which he found irritating in theory and correct in practice. He had strong opinions about the way she tended to skip meals when she was deep in correspondence work, which she found irritating in theory and was secretly glad of in practice. They argued sometimes, cleanly and directly, in the way of two people who say what they mean and do not leave things to fester. She once told him, after a disagreement about a contract she had taken that required her to be away for 3 weeks, that he was not allowed to tell her what commissions to accept, and he said, "You are absolutely right, and I apologize." And she looked at him for a moment and said, "You are very frustrating to fight with," and he said, "I know, I'm sorry." And she went and did the commission and came back 16 days later, and walked into the forge without knocking and kissed him like punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. The Voss case resolved 3 months after the hearing. He was found guilty of criminal fraud and incitement, and sentenced to loss of guild standing and a significant fine, a portion of which by order of Helver went directly to Lash's war band as restitution for the 4 people hurt in the ambush. It was not the punishment Lash had originally wanted, in the months when she was still deciding between justice and something older and less legal, but it was real and it was public, and it put Voss's name on a magistrate's record in letters that would not come off. Marin quietly withdrew his toll road claim. John heard this from the garrison armorer, who heard it from a man at the castle, who heard it from Marin's own steward. Apparently the Lord had concluded that the cost-benefit calculation of pursuing it was unfavorable, given the attention the case had drawn. John chose to believe that Lash's visit to the castle had something to do with this. The Stoneback Road was, by the following spring, back under the protection of a Steeljaw contract. The warband worked it out of a camp 2 miles north of the city wall, and Lash rode out to them twice a week to review reports and issue direction, and came home to John each time with mud on her boots and the cold, fresh smell of the hill country road, and the particular satisfaction of someone doing the work they were made for. He asked her about the Steeljaw clan mark once, running his thumb over the tooled pattern on the chest of her leather vest, and she told him what each symbol meant: her father's name, her rank, the names of the warband's 3 founding engagements. She turned the vest over and showed him the inside, where a single line of text was burned into the leather in Orcish script. "What does it say?" he asked. She looked at it for a moment. "Approximately, honor is not a thing you are given. It is a thing you build." He thought about this. "Your father's, mine," she said. "I burned it in when I took the rank, as a reminder." He looked at her face, and at the inside of the leather vest, and thought about a woman of 20 who had just lost her father and taken on his warband, and had stopped to burn a line of text into her own armor as a reminder of what she was doing it for. He thought about the methodical building of evidence over 4 months. He thought about 40 silver marks and the specific expression on a face that was not used to being helped. He folded the vest carefully and set it aside and said, "You know what I think you're good at? Intimidating petty lords," she said dryly. "Also that, I think you're good at knowing what matters." He looked at her. "I think you know what matters and you commit to it entirely and you don't let other people's opinions redirect you. I think that's the most admirable quality a person can have, and I don't think you know how rare it is." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the upper window, the spring evening was blue and warm, and the market was wrapping up for the day, the last of the cart wheels on the cobblestones. "I did not know what I had missed," she said finally, "until you. I told myself I had everything I needed. The war band, the work, the road. I told myself that was enough." "Was it?" "It was sufficient," she said. "It is not the same thing." He reached for her hand and she gave it to him without the old hesitation, naturally, the way you give your hand to someone you have been giving it to for months and expect to go on giving it to. "No," he said, "it is not the same thing." She turned to look at him, fully, and the evening light was in her face, and he thought she had never looked more like herself than she did right now, here in his rooms above his forge in the city she had come to as a prisoner, looking at him with eyes that held no calculation at all anymore, only the wide, open certainty of someone who has stopped bracing for the ground to give way. The summer brought work and warmth, and the comfortable expansion of a life that had made room for 2. John's commissions grew, partly because he was sleeping properly and eating properly, and had his tools organized in a way that actually made sense, and partly because the Steeljaw trading stall had started quietly directing buyers to him when they wanted quality steel, and Har had told 2 merchant guild representatives that the bladesmith across the square was reliable, which was the highest possible endorsement in that particular trading culture. He made Lash a knife in the late summer, not a commission, not a payment, just a thing he made because he wanted to. It was a clip-point fighting knife, 14-inch blade of high-carbon steel that he worked for 3 weeks until the temper was exactly what he wanted, with a grip of dark horn that fit her hand specifically, and a small engraved mark on the ricasso that was the Steeljaw clan symbol done in his own hand from studying her vest. He gave it to her one evening without ceremony, just set it on the table and sat down across from her. She picked it up, turned it, felt the weight, ran her thumb along the flat of the blade, reading the temper the way she always did, the way he had taught her and she had learned perfectly. She looked at the clan mark on the ricasso for a long moment. Then she looked at him and she said, in the direct, unvarnished way that was entirely hers, "This is a courtship gift." He did not pretend it wasn't. "Yes," he said. In Orc custom, he knew from what she had told him over the months, a courtship gift was a serious thing, more formal than a ring, more binding than a declaration. It was a blade or a made thing that said, "I am claiming you as mine and I want you to claim me back." It was offered by either party and the acceptance was the answer. She set the knife on the table between them. He waited. She reached across and took his hand and turned it palm up and said, In my custom, the answer to a courtship gift is a mark. She reached for the small knife at her belt, not the new one, her everyday working knife, and made a small, careful cut on the pad of her own thumb. Then she pressed it to his open palm, just a small mark of pressure, the traditional orc gesture that said, "I am here and I am yours and I am not going anywhere." He closed his hand over it. "Lash Steeljaw," he said. "John Lockhart," she said, with the grave precision of someone saying a name they have been carrying carefully for a long time. He got up from his side of the table and came to hers, and she stood and met him, and he held her and she held him back, her face against his neck, his chin in her hair. And outside, the summer evening of Karrenmoor went on being loud and ordinary, and neither of them needed it to be anything else. In the early autumn, when the angle of the light went golden, and the hills north of the city turned to colors, Cred came south for a week with 2 of the war band and stayed in the square camp. And on the last evening, they built the big fire and someone brought the grain spirit again, and there was singing again. Cred found John at the edge of the fire circle and sat down next to him and said, without any preamble, "You are good for her." John looked at him. "I told you what she needed," Cred said. "Someone who would stand next to her and hand her the thing she needed before she had to ask. You do that." He looked across the fire to where Lash was sitting with Sova and 2 of the other younger fighters, her voice warm and easy in a way it was not always easy in the city among strangers. "She is lighter," Cred said. 7 years I have known her and she has always carried everything right up to her shoulders. This year she is lighter." John watched her across the fire, her head thrown back laughing at something Sova had said, the firelight catching the green of her eyes, the curve of her throat. He had told her 3 nights ago in the dark and quiet of their rooms that he loved her, and she had said, "I know," and then a moment later quietly in the tone of someone saying a true thing for the first time, "I love you too." And then, "I'm not very good at saying that." And he had said, "I know, keep saying it anyway." And she had said, "All right." "I know," he told Cred. Cred nodded once, satisfied, and got up and went back to the fire. The winter came with cold and sharp light, and the particular pleasure of a well-made forge in the mornings, the heat of it spreading through the stone building into the rooms above where the bed was warm and Lash was warm, and the whole of Karrenmoor could be as cold as it liked. She read his books, all of them eventually, and then started bringing books from the Steeljaw trading stall, orcish texts on warfare and tactics, which she translated passages from for him, and a very old illuminated bestiary that she had owned since she was a child and treated with the careful tenderness of something precious. He made her a bookstand so she could read at the workbench without holding the volume open with both hands, and she used it every evening without comment. But he caught her running her hand along the grain of the wood, once with an expression that made his chest ache in the best possible way. He sold 4 presentation pieces that went her to noble households that had heard of his work through the merchant guild connections, and one of them commissioned a matched pair of ceremonial swords for a wedding gift. That was the most technically complex piece he had attempted in years, and kept him occupied and satisfied for 2 full months. Lash supervised the temper on both blades with the focus of a person who understands that this was not just metal but reputation. And the day he delivered them, she put her hand on his shoulder at the door of the noble house and said quietly, "Those are the finest work you have done," and said it like she was proud of him, like his work was also hers to be proud of. And he stood on the noble house steps with the empty velvet case under his arm, and let that feeling go all the way down to the floor of him. The warband's Grayville contract extended through the winter into the spring, and the spring brought a new contract, this one from the Eastern Guild directly, a formal, paid, written agreement that recognized the Steeljaw warband as a licensed protection company in Karrenmoor's jurisdiction, which was the first formal recognition of its kind, and which had been, Lash told him quietly one evening, the thing she had been working toward for 7 years. She came home with the signed contract and set it on the workbench and looked at it for a long moment. He came to stand beside her and read it over her shoulder. He noted the careful formal language. He noted the guild seal. He noted the clause that specified equal legal standing for grievances brought by the contracted company. He put his arm around her. 7 years, he said. 7 years, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand, when she picked up the contract, was holding it a little tighter than necessary. He held her and she let herself be held, and after a moment she folded the contract and put it in the leather satchel. She kept her important documents in, and then she turned and kissed him with the specific warmth of someone who has worked for a long time toward something and arrived at it, and wants to share the moment with the person they love. "John," she said, against his mouth. "What?" "I want to tell you something." "Tell me." She leaned back enough to look at his face. "When I was in the cage at the gate," she said, "I told myself I was tracking Voss. I told myself that was why I came to Karrenmoor. That was the only reason I was there. I did not want to be there. I had been in bigger cities with more legal resources, and I chose here because Voss was here, and that was the whole story I told myself." She paused. "But the reason I actually stayed after you paid the price. The reason I came back after I sent the warband south. The reason I slept in your back room and worked your forge and went to the magistrate with you at my shoulder." She stopped. "You don't have to explain," he said. "I want to," she said. "I want you to know." She met his eyes. "You were the reason. From the 4th day when you told me you wanted to know my story. That was when I knew. I told myself I was staying for Voss and the case and my people, and all of that was true, but it was not the whole truth." She looked at him with those dark green eyes that had been reading him since the cage, since the first cup of water through the bars, since he had been a plain-faced bladesmith with calloused hands and 2 quiet evenings who had looked at her and seen a person. "You were staying for me," he said. "I was staying for you," she confirmed. He held her face, and she put her hands over his, and they stayed there in the forge in the spring afternoon light, with the sound of the market square outside, and the smell of coal and hot metal, and the particular smell that was hers, cold air and wood smoke and something clean, and he thought that the right place feeling had not once gone away. It had settled. It had become the floor under his feet, and the walls around him, and the warm, constant pressure of her hand in his. "Good," he said, using her word from that first night at the table. She laughed and pressed her forehead to his, and they stood there a moment, breathing. The spring market brought new clients and a warm evening that opened the square up again after the closed-in winter months. And on a particular market day, in early spring, Lash walked through the square beside him with her hand in his, and not a single person looked away in discomfort. Or if they did, it was a shorter look than it used to be. Because Karrenmoor had spent a winter watching a warband captain win a landmark legal case and sign a guild contract and keep the roads north and east moving safely, and the city, as cities do, had slowly adjusted its opinion of what was possible. Tull, the grain merchant of all people, actually nodded to them from across the square. John nodded back. Lash looked at him sideways. "Is that—" "Yes," John said. He nodded. He did. She considered this. "Interesting." "Cities change," John said, "slowly and imperfectly, but they change." She looked at the square, the stalls and the cobblestones and the castle gate where the public cage still hung on its ring bolts, empty now, and the forge across from it with its banked fire and its cooling rack of blades, and the window above where she had been for months now, her books on the shelf and her weapons on the peg by the door and her boots beside his by the hearth. She looked at the square the way you look at a place that was not yours and then was. "They do," she said. She squeezed his hand and he squeezed back, and they walked through the spring morning market of Karrenmoor together, and the light was good, and the square was full, and everything that had needed to be resolved was resolved, and there was nowhere either of them was going without the other. He had spent 11 years in this city with his forge and his blades and the 2 quiet evenings and the locked box under the floor, and he had been competent and fair and steady and thoroughly, entirely, specifically alone. He had been decent, and it had mostly gone unnoticed. He had offered his best work to anyone who wanted it and his company to very few people, and been only occasionally lonely in a conscious way, and more often lonely in the background way that you don't notice until it stops. It had stopped. The evening settled over the city, and they went home to the forge and up the stairs to their rooms, and the hearth was warm and her book was on the stand, and his tools were organized in the precise way that still slightly irritated him and was undeniably correct. And she came to him in the firelight and put her arms around his neck and looked at him with those green eyes that had been reading him since a cage at the castle gate, since the first cup of water, since the precise and guarded moment when she had decided he was real. He was real. He had always been real. He had simply needed someone with the patience and the particular skill of seeing to find the whole of it. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I am very glad you came to Karrenmoor," he said. She considered this with the grave attention she gave to all true things. "So am I," she said, and she kissed him in the firelight of the forge above the square, and outside the spring evening of the city went on, ordinary and full, and the coals settled in the grate, and the blades on the cooling rack reflected the last of the light, and everything was exactly, finally, and completely as it should be.